This podcast is made possible by NetSuite by Oracle.
Hi, this is Charles Freund, CFO of FleetCor, and you are listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 804.
Whenever you start changing a paradigm, whenever you start kind of moving things around, I think the initial human interaction is, wait a minute, what's going on here? And it's almost a natural bit of distrust or guilty until proven innocent. But understanding that you have to change, you have to evolve, but you can do it in a way that kind of takes into account people's positions, that recognize that there's always going to be some obstacle or some discomfort with that, and trying to understand what that is, where it's coming from, so that you can continue to move. Because obviously this business is going to be very different than the one we walked into, a few years hence. But you have to make sure that people feel that not only bring them along, but they feel good about it.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Al Farrell, CFO of Transaction Data Systems. It's only been a few months since Al Farrell stepped into the CFO office at Transaction Data Systems, a SaaS developer serving independent pharmacies across the country. Farrell tells us he likes the SaaS business model, its visibility, its unit economics, and having had multiple CFO tours of duty in different industries, Farrell has a point of comparison, including one with the car rental industry, where he occupied the CFO office at Advantage RentACar from 2016 until earlier this year. Not unlike those CFO guests who we discover when they worked on Wall Street in 2008, we have to ask them about the economic downturn, what takeaways, what they learned. Similarly, we could not resist asking Al about being in the car rental business in January 2020 when COVID arrives. He was good enough to answer our questions and offer some takeaways as far as what he learned. Our talk with CFO Al Farrell begins after this.
This is it, the putt to win the tournament. If you sink it, the championship is yours. But on your backswing, your hat falls over your eyes. Is this how you're running your business? Poor visibility, because you're still relying on spreadsheets and outdated finance software. To see the full picture, you need to upgrade to NetSuite by Oracle. Over 28,000 businesses already use NetSuite. For the new year, NetSuite has a new financing program for those ready to upgrade at netsuite.com/CFOpod. Head to netsuite.com/CFOpod for this special one-of-a-kind financing offer on the #1 financial system for growing businesses. netsuite.com/CFOpod.
Hello, we're speaking with Al Farrell, CFO of Transaction Data Systems. Al, welcome.
Thank you, Jack. Nice to be here.
So, Al, we always begin with this question. Please look back for us and share with us some of those experiences that you feel prepared you to become a CFO. What would those experiences be?
Well, I'll tell you, I've taken a fairly circuitous route to becoming a CFO. And, as I look back, it's funny how things kind of cobble together and ultimately kind of make sense when you get to the end of the journey. They didn't always make that much sense during the journey. But, I started as a systems consultant once upon a time for what became Accenture. And then, back in the day when Wall Street was a good job and they were the good guys, I decided I wanted to get some of that experience. So after business school, I became an investment banker. And being an investment banker is just a great way to experience a lot of industries, learn about capital markets and about corporate structures and tax and things kind of, at a high level. But then as I decided I really wanted to be part of a management team and really work with a group to build something, I recognized that I really needed to kind of get into a company. And as I did that and started to kind of elevate to the CFO position, all of those experiences really kind of came together in a way that I could understand, the infrastructure and the external part of it. And then obviously you've got to back that up with some good technical accounting knowledge and understand workings, and then learn about leadership, because you don't learn anything about leadership in investment banking. You have to do it in a real company. But all of that kind of came together for me that really was very helpful to me.
I'd like to just, if it's okay, zero in on some of the segues with you. You mentioned Accenture, which I recall it was previously Anderson Consulting.
That's right.
And I imagine that's what you were referring to. So you got an MBA to kind of, take that next step or get you into banking, perhaps. I'm not sure if that was what you were thinking at the outset of that.
No, it really was a transition time. And, as I started business school way back in 1987, it was just about a month and a half after we started that the market crash of 87 hit. And I remember there was a big white flag out in front of Stewart Hall at our business school saying, "Don't panic." And, all the investment banking schedules went away. I mean, literally everybody just stopped recruiting. I was lucky enough to get a summer associate position at JP Morgan, which was just a phenomenal firm. And of course, back then, JP Morgan was 20,000 people. Now they're 220,000 people. Very different firm today than it was then. But I went through and got some great experiences. When I remember when I was in the equity capital markets group, we were doing a global offering for a Brazilian company, and it was a Brazilian management team. And frankly, their English wasn't that great. So we were up doing a road show in New York, and these guys just could not get the point across. So I kind of stepped in and ended up delivering the road show. And I thought, this is fun. It's interesting. I'm telling a great story. But it also dawned on me how little I knew about actually being in a company and running. This is the old principal versus agent kind of positioning. So that was one of the transition points where I loved the firm. I loved the business. It was very interesting. It was lucrative. But that's when I kind of decided, I think I need to be more part of a team and part of being in a company to really bring value and deliver value. Otherwise, you're always kind of on the outside.
That's we refer to that as the operations itch. I don't know if you feel as if that highlights your experience, but you spent a solid decade though in banking, and it roughly the 1990s and it was between JP Morgan and Bank of America Securities.
That's right.
When you do leave, did you have any sense of what have I, oh gosh, what have I done? I mean, you obviously understood the banking world by that time. So you were taking something of a risk. Was it initially everything you hoped, or what was your thinking?
Well, originally I kind of went off and did a few entrepreneurial sprints, which really gave me appreciation for how tough it is to create and build a business. And, I'd say we had commercial success in a couple of those adventures, not enough financial success to really make it make sense, but it gave me a great appreciation for, that side of the fence. Because investment banking, you get to see all the good stuff, because by the time they get to you, that's when they're growing or going public or doing big M&A deals. But it gave me really a look at what it's like to start and grow and develop a business. And then I think, again, that kind of finding yourself as part of a team with a business that was established, and going into the private equity world, the investment banking was a very good preparation, both analytically, financially, and frankly, the work hours for some of the PE work. But that really gave me the background to do it. And then as I got into the operational side of the business, I recognized right away I had a lot to learn. I had a lot to learn both in how businesses worked, how to put teams together, how to motivate them and lead them. And so it was definitely years of transition to kind of move to the other side of the fence. But in hindsight now, and being part of this team here, I'm very glad I did. It worked out well for me.
You've had a succession of CFO roles I want to mention. And before we ask you about uh, transaction data systems, find out about that business, I have to say your most recent chapter um, is the one that has no shortage of intrigue for me. And I'm referring to your years at Advantage RentACar. Is that right?
That's right.
I just have to say, I mean, it's one of the most closely observed industries during the pandemic, along with the travel and hotel industry. We all witnessed it up close, the dilemma and the situation. And I can only imagine what early 2020, what might have been going through your head as the CFO of Advantage. Am I right about everything I'm pointing out so far, or what would you tell us?
Absolutely. So, I joined Advantage in 2016, and the CEO and I joined at the same time. We were really brought on to sell the company. We first had to consummate the merger of two companies, Advantage, which has been around for a very long time, started by a family in Texas back in the 60s, and EZ Rent-A-Car, which was where this was based. And had consolidated the two, and the thing was run on QuickBooks. It was all kinds of crazy stuff that we just had to infrastructurally clean up. And then we had a prolonged courtship that we were very literally in Wiles' offices in New York in January 2020, right at the end of the month, finalizing a purchase sale agreement. We got on the plane, went back to Orlando, and that's when Trump announced the international travel ban. And within 5 business days, 96% of our reservations went up in smoke, as did, unfortunately, that sale transaction. So it was a very, very challenging time. And unfortunately, we had to shepherd that company through a restructuring and an eventual liquidation. But we learned a great deal. And, prior to that, when we first came in and really looked at the business, at our peak, we had about a $650 million fleet investment. We had 35,000 vehicles all over the country and continental U.S. and Hawaii. And we really needed to optimize the investment. This was, I think, as we look at, where the opportunity was, we did a great deal to improve the infrastructure and to improve the return on investment in that business. But when something like COVID hits in a business that is that sensitive, and of course, it's like the airlines in the fact that you have a very capital investment. It's unlike in the airlines that you have a perishable commodity asset, but you don't have a firm reservation. People generally don't prepay for the reservations. They cancel them on a whim. And that made it particularly difficult to navigate with that company.
How do you think, any idea how you think the industry will reform itself? Is it a different business model? Are they going to just operate differently, or it can't go back to that model? It showed how vulnerable it was to something like this, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that transformation had started well before COVID. And you see with all kinds of different business models, Turo and GoCar and these kind of more on-demand services that really fit more the profile of either fractional ownership or just on-demand use of vehicles. I think that you're seeing that transform greatly, both in terms of the base of the model. Hertz has announced their Tesla deal, so you're going more toward, as the automotive industry in general, electric, moving more toward self-driving vehicles. But also, I think this idea of a more fungible asset base that's kind of there on demand for renters, because more and more, you see this generationally, and I think also just in terms across the economy, there's more desire to rent than own. There's more desire to have flexibility. And so I think we're going to continue to see very significant transformation in how people rent and use automobiles.
Well, we're up to your latest CFO career chapter then, Al. And first off, let's ask you about transaction data systems. What does this company do, and what are its offerings today?
This is a great company. First of all, it really is a company in the business of serving the pharmaceutical industry. And our marketplace is the independent pharmacist. And one of the things that surprised me when I first was introduced to the business is that we've got over 22,000 independent pharmacists in this country, and it's actually a number that's been stable and somewhat growing over the last decade or so. So with all of these movements with CVS and Walgreens and all the big chain stores getting into the business, you still have a very resilient and resourceful group of independent pharmacists. And what we do is provide really their core ERP system, if you will, called a PMS, a pharmacy management system. It's the system of record that they run their business on. We also do point of sale POS that couples with the PMS. So it's kind of a full infrastructure platform to them. But that core then becomes a platform that we build ecosystem services for them and revenues for us in the business. We're located throughout the U.S. We've got over 7,000 independent pharmacist customers. We touch about 2.5 million lives, and it's a great platform both for current recurring revenue and this kind of software as a service model, but also a great platform for growth and acquisition. We're backed by one of the many BlackRock funds, so we've got the resources and I think now the management team and the structure to really build and grow out the business in a number of very interesting ways.
At the same time, it's a software company, more a SaaS software company. Have you actually acquired pharmacy businesses along the way? Is that what you're actually buying the business itself?
Well, the business, it was the compilation of 3 different PMS businesses. So those platforms were cobbled together that ultimately we're consolidating onto a couple of platforms, and we may acquire another PMS. But that really forms the core, and what we're looking at now is more of the ecosystem, because what we really need to do is connect the payers, the Humanas and the United Healthcares and others of the world and the pharmaceutical manufacturers in a way that we deliver better outcomes to those pharmacist patients, with the pharmacist being at the core of it, because those community pharmacists are really the trusted voice, the connection of patients to medication programs, to adherence, to clinical services and patient engagement. So we sit at the apex of all of that to connect them. And what I think we'll see as the business model evolves is the PMS software will continue to be core to the business and to those pharmacists, but around that we will evolve to a more service-based platform, particularly on the clinical services and patient engagement, the kind of thing that you're seeing across your pharmacy, whether you go to a independent community pharmacy or you go to CVS or Walgreens or Publix or wherever it is. The direction is clear. And for us in the independent pharmacy world, we're the connector for that.
Interesting. So tell us a little bit about your lines of sight and the numbers that are you're keeping a close eye on to make certain the business is operating the way it should, performing the way it should. What would those metrics be?
Well, as a CFO, you got to keep an eye on a couple of buckets, right? You first have to look at the operational buckets, and for us, keeping a very close eye on the recurring revenue, which is both a function of just monthly subscriptions, but also the transaction revenue that we generate. We take a little piece of the scripts and of the credit card transactions, et cetera, that are done. So we need to make sure we keep a very close eye on store count, on recurring revenue, transaction, subscription, et cetera. But then also developing better ways to really understand and ultimately anticipate and quantify and forecast the ecosystem revenues. So out of that, we get data, for example, and we monetize that data in various ways, again, to help those other payers and pharmaceutical manufacturers to understand the patient better and understand what they need. So we look closely at revenue. Obviously, you've got to keep a close eye to expense and operational expense and understand what's fixed and variable and how that scales. We're working toward really better understanding the kind of the contribution by customer. While they're all independent pharmacies, some are chains, some are independent standalones. There's some heterogeneity there. And then the other side of being a PE CFO is you've got to keep an eye on, the big picture in terms of the valuation metrics and how we look to external, both in ultimately in EBITDA as well as multiples of recurring revenue and all of that.
I know you arrived earlier this year, and I'm curious, were you surprised? You mentioned the data. Wondering if you could be a bit more specific as to what that data, what the data pool is, or what exactly you're looking at there.
Well, you look at a bunch of basic metrics, right? We look at store counts. We look at the churn on those store counts, which is very critical because we are, one of the leading players. There's a lot of competitive forces, and as PE money goes, there's been more PE money coming into this, funding more and more kind of competitive behavior, and looking at the recurring revenues, but getting behind really in a better understanding of the transaction, what we call switching. Switching is when you go out, when a pharmacist goes out to an insurance company and sees what the reimbursements are, but better breaking that down and understanding where that is, and then looking forward, trying to understand how we can better support that pharmacist and add not only to their revenue base, but to ours in the process as we look at clinical services, as we look at medication adherence programs, which are still evolving and developing from the payers. The payers want to get better scores with Medicare, and the manufacturers obviously want to sell more of what they're manufacturing the things that people really need. So looking at what data we pull out, how we aggregate it, how we put that forward, and then how we can provide those better services. There's an operational component to just better understand and track, and as I say, quantify our ecosystem revenues. But also then as we look to the M&A world, what do we want to acquire? Do we want to buy businesses in the patient engagement, which brings that patient better connected to the payers and providers? Do we want to acquire more on the clinical services? And that's everything from vaccinations to medication adherence programs and others. So understanding it both from a strategic standpoint and understanding our current base of revenue and where those revenue opportunities come from.
And is there do you look at it geography wise as well? I mean, the footprint, is it largely in the eastern portion of the U.S. or is it broader?
We're fairly broadly based. We do business in all 50 states. Like most businesses, we tend to have higher concentrations on the coasts. It's a population thing. But also, I think what we're really looking for is really more programmatic. It's really, we have different payer relationships, and different payers tend to be in different geographies, but it's the programs that they're driving that really affect all patients in a similar way that we're really more sensitive to. So it's really more of, looking above and looking to connect, as opposed to just looking at individual pharmacies and seeing what we can do for them on an individual or geographic or industry segment basis.
It sounds like this company is likely to be acquisitive during your CFO tenure here. Would we expect to see a deal within the next 12 months?
I think it will be quite unlikely that we don't do at least one deal in the next 12 months. This is PE 101, right? We've got solid backing and we've got a good platform, but they want to add on to it and make it larger. And that way we're more relevant to our customers. We have more revenue channels. We have a broader depth and resiliency, financially. And obviously we become more valuable for their limited partners and to go to whatever our next liquidity event may be.
I want to just touch on talent with you. Curious if you have had to give it a little more thought. Given your last chapter, there was a lot of pain associated with that, I would imagine, in terms of layoffs and what have you at Advantage. As you step into this new role, we're living in this sort of unusual environment, and themes like the Great Resignation, how the workforce, many people are continue to work remote. Are these part of your talent mindset today? Is that something you allow the HR department to cover, or are you having conversations discussing some of the talent challenges that
this new environment presents?
Now, we spend a lot of our time, both as an aggregate management team, as well as in each of our functional areas and with HR, on talent management, talent acquisition. It's become a lot more complicated. I think there's a kind of an evolving ideal of what work and work-life balance and geography and working in an office versus working remotely. As we have made the prior acquisitions, we've consolidated our footprint and we're really centralizing ourselves in 2 offices. But as a consequence of that, we had some very, many talented people around the country and in some of the geographies in which we had offices that we've now closed. And so as we sit today, we're actually more remote employees than we are employees working in an office. And even in the office, that's become a hybrid. It's become, 3 days a week. So it starts with really thinking about what talent you need and where it is and accommodating them. And then, constant communication and training to develop them. I do lunch and learns here each month, which is a great way for people to come together. And I think they do enjoy at least part of that week being together, being in an office. And of course, in finance, I liken finance very much in accounting to manufacturing. Everything's got to kind of happen a certain time and a certain way to get good quality information and timely and relevant information. And so I think people being in each other's faces, if you will, but also learning about the other parts of the business, because, it's one thing to see the numbers. It's a very different thing to understand them in the context of different operations. So I'll have different areas of the business come in our little lunch and learns, and they can understand more about whether it's our EMS business or the PMS business and how it works, how it's sold, and ultimately what's behind the numbers that they're working with each day. And then I think it's really just understanding the needs. As I've come in, I'm evolving the group, and we're changing out some people. My first priority is really to keep talent that we have and develop it, because that legacy and that understanding, that domain knowledge is very difficult to replace. But sometimes, just as a consequence of the way things have evolved, you've got the wrong person in the wrong role. And where you have that, you really need to make a change for the betterment of the business and for the rest of the team members. And if you do that right, that generally is well received, because they understand that you're just trying to get it right and get the best result for all, and better support and understanding or leadership or expertise.
Right. Well, we're up to what we refer to as our finance strategic moment question. And this is where we are just asking for a single anecdote or a story from somewhere along your career where your lines of sight allowed you to see a risk or an opportunity and respond to it. Does anything come to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
Yeah, so somehow or another, I've stumbled into a number of asset-intense businesses. I'll be honest with you, I do prefer the software as a service business better as a model. But as we worked through this, I learned in one of the companies that we did as a pallet rental company that your understanding of the asset and the return on the asset was really one of the most powerful financial understandings you could have in the business. And if you convey that out into the business, it was very powerful. So when we were at the rental car company, we came in, we looked at the total utilization on that large investment in a fleet, as I said, about $650 million at its peak. And we were in the high 70s in terms of total percent utilization. Now, world class is 90, 91, 92%. You'll never get above that, because you have cars in maintenance and body shop, and you have to turn them around in the ready lines, et cetera, et cetera. But as a result of really digging in and understanding that, and it really gets driven by the data. So initially finance, led by all the different functional areas of the company, we dug in and we did a series of, call them Kaizens. There's all kinds of terms of just getting together and problem solving and developing. We were able to improve the utilization of that fleet by almost 12 absolute percentage points, 11.9%, which on an investment like that is a monumental improvement in EBITDA and in just the quality and security of the operation, better customer service, et cetera, et cetera. And it was everything from the way we financed the vehicles, the way we entered the vehicles, the way we exited the vehicles, the way we prepared them and turned them around to customers, the way we dealt with body shops, et cetera. So it was a very kind of holistic business view, but it started with really understanding the data and understanding where those opportunities were, really drilling in, if you will, into the different financial metrics around the asset and around the operational activities in the asset. So unfortunately, it didn't come to the company didn't come to the outcome that we wanted, but during our process, and had COVID not hit, I think we would have had a very successful sale in a business that was significantly more productive and more lucrative than when we first found it.
The business landscape is changing quickly. As the pressure to manage expenses efficiently and strategically increases, you need solutions that not only help drive down costs and improve efficiencies, but meet the changing needs of your business. At U.S. Bank, we can help. We'll work with you to uncover your specific payment challenges and bring you proactive and innovative solutions and strategies that help you meet the financial goals of your organization. Our commitment to doing the right thing for our customers has earned us the designation of one of the world's most ethical companies from the Ethisphere Institute for 6 years in a row. To learn more, visit us at usbpayment.com.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that. That's very interesting. We're going to jump to our mentoring round, where we're going to we begin by asking you about that first time you took on a CFO appointment, that first 30 days you were in that role. This goes back a number of CFO tours of duty, no doubt. But thinking about that first quarter, if you could go back and give yourself advice when you first took on, again, all that leadership responsibility, signing off on the numbers, what have you, what would you tell yourself?
I think one of the first big reveals for me was, and especially in today's world, to be a successful CFO, you kind of have to have a couple different legs of the stool. So when I first came into it, I really had kind of world-class capital markets and analytics and that kind of understanding. That was really valuable to me and useful, but that was only one leg of the stool. I had studied accounting and, of course, worked with accounting in those roles in a way, but I really needed a more in-depth kind of technical accounting knowledge, which I've bolstered over time, but I was light, I think, in that first role. And then, of course, the third role is just being part of a management team. When you're an investment banker, you tend to be very much, or a consultant, you tend to be very much a maverick, kind of on your own and hunter-killer and working on your next deal, et cetera. So understanding the dynamic of where you fit in that team and how you contribute and how you can convey information and how you can leverage that information. And then finally, leadership. And, I'll tell you, I heard this concept probably 20 years ago for the first time, servant leadership. And it meant nothing to me. In fact, I kind of brushed it off at the time. And as I have grown in these roles and I have managed more and more people, it's a very important and powerful concept to me. And a lot of people misunderstand it. I took one of these tests as I was searching for this role. And it was a profile, and there were a lot of questions about, do you take people's opinion into account when you're making business decisions? And, frankly, I don't. I don't care about people's opinions. I care about hard data, and I care about what's best for the business and the team. That's not servant leadership. Servant leadership is really understanding people and where they're coming from. And, for example, in one of the roles, I had a woman who was just an incredible producer, and all of a sudden she just completely fell apart. Nobody understood what really went on with her, and she didn't want to share anything. But because we were fairly close as a team, and I was very close to her, she confided in me what had been going on with her family and things. And that became an extremely important thing to understand, because it would have been very easy to just send her on her way, to restructure around her, or whatever. But giving her some time so that she could get through that and come back to the team not only engendered more trust in the team and more openness, And again, in finance, it's very important. People have to be uncovering problems and being honest with one another. But true servant leadership, I think, is really understanding your team, the people, what experience they have, what they're going through, and making sure that you're kind of making the right deposits and withdrawals in the bank of human capital, as an old CEO of mine used to make. Those are the things that I think I've learned over time that I wish I'd had a better understanding of back in the day.
Excellent. Thank you for that. We haven't talked about servant leadership for a while, so thank you for highlighting it on this episode. It's been too long. We always like to ask our guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side, Al, and I don't know if you have a personal habit or part of a daily routine that you're known for, something you've done over time. It might be something a family member would point out to us. That's what Al does. This is how he does it. But we're looking for something that might set you apart just from all these other CFOs we talk to.
Well, I think, on the personal side, if you talk to my family, you might get a lot of different answers. But I think, again, coming to the concept that I was just talking about, really trying to understand where everyone is, whether that's in your family, whether that's in your genetic family, your business family, your other relationships. I do try to dedicate a lot of time to kind of, communication, interaction, and understanding where they're coming from, because we all get wrapped up in our own experience. We all have our own view of the world, but I really try to be less me-centric and a little bit more kind of, trying to listen and understand. And I'm sure my wife would contradict that from time to time. I tell you that I'm a little too abrupt and a little too short in some things, and I know that I am, but that's certainly what at least I work toward and I strive for. And I learned that early on. I remember my father going into my father's office when I was very young, and he'd go in on a Saturday, and he knew every person in that building. Not the professionals are working, so there weren't that many, frankly, on a Saturday. But the janitorial staff, the security guard, he knew them. He knew what was going on with their families, and it impressed me. And it seemed to matter to me. And I think it really does matter.
Interesting. Great detail there for us. Wondering if you have a book recommendation for us. Doesn't have to be a business book. Might be something you escape with. Don't know, but anything come to mind?
One of the ones I always liked. It's kind of a classic business book, but I think it's an important understanding is, Who Moved My Cheese? People, and I think it's probably as true today, maybe even more true today than it used to be in the past, and it gets back to, again, this remote working and office working. And whenever you start changing a paradigm, whenever you start kind of moving things around, I think the initial human interaction is, wait a minute, what's going on here? And it's almost a natural bit of distrust or guilty until proven innocent. But understanding that, not only do you change, you have to evolve, but you can do it in a way that kind of takes into account people's positions, that recognize that there's always going to be some obstacle or some discomfort with that, and trying to understand what that is, where it's coming from, so that you can continue to move. Because obviously this business is going to be very different than the one we walked into a few years hence, when we go again to whatever that next liquidity event is. And you have to move fast, but you have to make sure that people feel that not only bring them along, but they feel good about it. So Who Moved My Cheese was one of my favorite ones.
Great one to highlight for us. Thank you. And we are up to our final question, where we're going to ask you to look forward for us and identify over the next 12 months, what are your priorities as a CFO?
Well, first of all, from the infrastructure, I want to continue to improve our processes, people, and systems, because that's what finance runs on. And we're looking at a variety of ways to do that, and a variety of kind of configurations, if you will, to do that. I think that we need to be at least on the path, if not at a point of public company readiness. Market's a little messy right now, but generally it tends to afford, high valuation multiples to well-functioning and good growth SaaS companies. So that may be a possibility. It's a possible exit, not necessarily the most probable or the one we'll do, but I think we need to be ready there. I think we need to have consolidated what will probably be a handful of acquisitions and do so in a way that both operationally and financially and from a risk and control standpoint are well established. And then, we've got to make sure that everybody's dressed up and ready to go on a roadshow. I don't think that'll happen in 12 months, but it certainly could happen in 24 months. And make sure that, not only have we gotten to where we want to be, but that we can present that and make sure that whoever the next owner of this business is, whether it's public or private, that they really fully understand the value.
Excellent. Al Farrell, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you so much, Jack.
Hello, listeners. Do us a favor. Be certain to subscribe to CFO Thought Leader on Apple Podcasts, or if you're an Android user, check us out on Spotify or Google Play. If you like the show, please recommend it to a friend.